Hey, it's Robin Robbins here again from ManagedServicesBlueprint.com, and this is another blog post in the series on overcoming objections when you're selling managed IT services. Okay, so last blog post, we talked about how objections are really just unanswered questions or misunderstandings, how to avoid them in the first place. I gave you some tips. Now, what I want to do is I want to teach you how to turn an objection into a question so you can answer it. Because if you remember on the previous blog post, we talked about how objections are simply unanswered questions. That's it, or maybe a misunderstanding. So if you've got an objection, the natural tendency is to try and give some logic around why that's not true or get them to see a different viewpoint. But what I have found in my experience is, number one, you want to make sure it's the real objection, the final objection, because you don't want to be chasing every single objection. Some of them are just smoke screens. And the other thing you want to do is turn it into a question, because you can answer a question, but if you try and answer an objection as it stands, it feels like you're arguing. Okay, so here's how you do it. The first thing I do is when a prospect raises an objection, like let's say, for example, they say, I don't want to be on any kind of contract. I just want to call you when I need you. I don't want to be in any long-term contract. So the first thing you do is you want to get them to explain it. So I'd say, I'm sure you have a good reason for saying that. May I ask what it is? Or, you could say, there's another way, and I've given you a script, by the way. I guess I should have mentioned this first. Right below this video, there is a little workbook or worksheet, if you will, that comes with it. And I've outlined this for you, so I've actually given you this script. So you can download this and practice it. But the first thing you say is, I'm sure you have a good reason for saying that. May I ask what it is? Get them to explain it. Then make sure it's the final objection. Again, you don't want to be answering every single objection they throw to you. Usually a sale is going to come down to one, maybe two key things that they're concerned about. Usually it's one. So the way you make sure it's a final objection before you go in to resolve it or answer that question, you say, let's suppose for a moment that signing a 3-year contract or a managed services contract wasn't a problem. Would we then have a basis for moving ahead? Okay, now, if they say no, there's got to be other things that are concerning them. So if they say no, then I'd say, well, I'm sure there must be something else that's concerning you. Can I ask what that is? And you keep doing that loop until you get to the final objection, or at least until you know you've got the final one or two. Usually it's not going to be more than that. So again, just suppose for a moment that signing a 3-year contract or whatever the objection is wasn't a problem. Will we then have a basis for moving ahead? And if they say yes, now what that's like a trial close, what they're saying is, if this wasn't a concern, if we can solve this problem, then you've got my business. All right, so now we know we're off to the races. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is also align with the prospect. Look, I would agree with them, because if anything, you can respect that that's a good objection or question to raise or a valid concern. So you can say, hey, that's a great point, or I'm glad you brought that up, or I agree with you, that's an area that we probably should have addressed further, or something like that. So you want to align. You never want to say but. So you don't want to say, well, that's a good point, but, or something like that. Because when you use the word but, you basically just dismissed everything you just said before. It's like saying, hey, you know what, you're my best friend in the world, but blah, blah, blah. Whenever you say the word but, it just kind of erases everything ahead of it. So use the word and. So you say, hey, that's a great point, and it brings up a question, and the question is, okay, and that's how you turn it into a question. So let's suppose the objection again is they don't want to sign a long-term contract, and you say, it's a great point, and I actually appreciate that. I understand that in business you don't want to get into long-term contracts. I'd be the same way if I were in your shoes and I had to maybe being faced with that decision. I'm actually glad you're bringing that up, because that shows me that you're actually thinking about this. And so I really appreciate that. And that brings up a question. And the question is, and then what I would have to do is remember all the results and the things that we talked about before that objection came up. So hopefully you've done a good job in the first meeting. You've talked to them. You understand what their concerns are. You've helped them create a vision for what they want, and a really crystal clear vision. Because most prospects don't know what they want. In most cases, they know what they don't want, but often they don't know what they do want. So part of your job as a consultant to them is to help them to visualize and crystallize what they really want. So let's say they want They want someone they can trust. They want somebody who's going to be responsive when they call. Let's say those were the things that they said were important to them. So I'd say, it's great. I really appreciate you bring up that concern about signing a long-term contract. And that brings up a question. And the question is, how can you start a relationship with a technology company or a partner that is going to be very responsive, who can be proactive and actually avoid the issues that you are having, which is something you said, make everything work the way it's supposed to, be on call for you and ready and waiting whenever you have an issue, and therefore get that peace of mind that everything's covered and you're not going to be down for hours, without having to really be concerned about that 3-year contract. Isn't that the question? Okay, so what you're doing is you're dipping back into what they said was most important to them. And by doing that, it shows that you're listening, and it's also helping them to understand that in order to get the results that they said they wanted, then this 3-year contract might be the absolute best way to deal with it. So I give you an example here below on your worksheet, and it says, and that brings up a question. The question is, how do you get rid of the ongoing problems with your computer network that's driving you nuts and causing you to miss deadlines and worry about the security of your data without putting a financial burden on your company, which maybe that would be the price objection. Isn't that the question? Okay, now obviously, go to your next page in your workbook. If you framed it correctly, they're going to say, yeah, I guess that is the question. And then all you have to do is answer the question. Now, there's a couple ways you can answer that question, and on the second page of the workbook, I've outlined them. So you could tell a client story. You could say, well, we've actually had a number of clients who were concerned about signing a 3-year contract, and then, and here's what we did. And we gave them a 6-month out. They could cancel at any time. And they found out that the benefits of this, that, the other far outweighed any concerns that they had. And we can actually have you speak to some of those people if you prefer. So you can tell a client story. You could also use contrast. So let's say it was a price objection. Well, I don't want to spend $1,000 a month on support because we've never spent that before. Then you could point back again. You've got to really have done a good job in the meeting in the first place. Because remember, I talked to you, don't jump on these objections too soon. Diagnose the situation, find out what's important to them. But you could use contrast. You could say, well, we already talked about how that slow server and the computer problems is costing you about 5 hours a month or 2 hours a week or whatever it is that you've uncovered. So really, if we get that back, it more than pays for itself. So it's kind of like that contrast. It just, you can use that to kind of put things in perspective. You could ask a question. You could say, well, based on what you've told me, wouldn't it cost you a lot more to do this, or to more not to do this than to do it? And again, you're going to have to tie it back to what they want. You could also just negotiate. So in other words, if let's say price is a concern or signing a 3-year contract is a concern, you could get curious, why do you feel that way? Get some history on it, and then maybe you say, well, how about if we do something like this? We sign a contract, it is a 3-year, and at any point you can cancel it, but if you cancel it, then you don't get then the discounts that I gave you are no longer long-term. So in other words, if you're getting a 20% discount on all our services because you're signing a 3-year, you can cancel early, but then the fees would be the same as if you were going month to month, which is a little bit higher, so you just have to pay that difference. Sort of like cell phone contracts, they make you pay like an exit fee or something like that. Or you could maybe say, I'll tell you what, we'll start with 6 months, and if everything's great, if you're happy with our services, then we'll just roll to a 3-year, but you'll have an out at that time. So that you can negotiate something where they feel a little bit more comfortable. And then you would do a test close, and you say, well, that solves that answers the question or solves the problem, doesn't it? And if they say yes, then you assume the sale, congratulate them, and you're off to the races. And if they say, no, it really doesn't, then what you've got to do is say, well, there must be something else that's causing you to hesitate. Can I ask what it is? And by asking these questions, if you master this really simple script, this script, when I outlined it for you here, I put it on 2 pieces of paper, but really you could probably get it down to 1 sheet of paper, real simple. You could probably get it on a note card, just asking those questions. So again, this is a really simple process for turning an objection into a question and answering the question in a very, very elegant and non-threatening way. So this is Robin signing off with another little marketing tip for all of you managed service providers. I'll see you on the next blog post.